Ancient scrolls that were buried in volcanic ash during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius are now being deciphered 2,000 years later, thanks in part to artificial intelligence.
What if I told you that buried beneath volcanic ash, locked inside a scroll no human hand could open for 2,000 years, was a message? Not a poem, not a recipe, a warning. And in 2025, a machine finally read it. For centuries, we assumed the ancient world had gone silent, that the voices carved into clay, scratched into bone, and pressed into charred papyrus were lost forever. But artificial intelligence is changing that, and the messages it's pulling from the darkness aren't what anyone expected. They speak of fire, of silence before collapse, of knowledge deliberately erased. Across unrelated civilizations, on different continents, in scripts with no common ancestor, the same themes keep appearing. Plague, drought, cosmic cycles of destruction, and the deliberate suppression of truth. So the question isn't just whether AI can read dead languages. The question is, were some of these languages killed on purpose? And if so, what were they trying to tell us that someone didn't want us to hear? Let's start with the discovery that shook the academic world and barely made a ripple outside of it. In 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted with catastrophic force, burying the Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum under waves of superheated gas and volcanic debris. Pompeii is the name everyone knows, but Herculaneum, closer to the coast and wealthier, was hit differently. Pyroclastic flows, reaching temperatures above 500 degrees Celsius, cooked the city in an instant. And in doing so, they accidentally preserved something extraordinary, an entire library. The villa of the papyri, believed to have belonged to the father-in-law of Julius Caesar, contained hundreds of scrolls. But the heat had carbonized them, fusing ink to paper, turning knowledge into fragile black cylinders, indistinguishable from lumps of charcoal. For centuries, every attempt to unroll them ended in destruction. The words inside were considered lost forever. Then, in March 2023, the Vesuvius Challenge was launched. Backed by former GitHub CEO Nat Friedman and computer scientist Brent Seals, this global competition offered over $1 million in prizes to anyone who could use machine learning and advanced imaging to read the scrolls without ever touching them. The method was extraordinary. Researchers used a particle accelerator called a synchrotron to blast the scrolls with precise X-rays, capturing thousands of cross-sectional images. Then, AI systems were trained to detect microscopic differences in density, teaching machines to see ink completely invisible to the human eye inside carbonized material. In October 2023, a college student named Luke Ferreter became the first person in nearly 2 millennia to read a word from inside a sealed scroll. The word was porphyros, Greek for purple, a color associated with royalty, power, and empire. That single word earned him a $40,000 prize. But it was only the beginning. By early 2024, Ferreter and fellow researchers Youssef Nader and Julian Schilliger had recovered over 2,000 Greek letters, enough to identify the author, Philodemus, a prominent Epicurean philosopher and student of Zeno of Sidon. By May 2025, researchers won a $60,000 prize for identifying the scroll's title and author. The work was On Vices by Philodemus, a treatise on moral corruption, the abuse of power, and blind obedience. The Epicureans weren't fringe thinkers. They challenged the political and religious establishment of the Roman Empire, rejected divine punishment, and warned against manipulating the masses through fear. And then, things got stranger. In February 2025, the Vesuvius Challenge announced another historic breakthrough. A fifth scroll, known as PHER-C 172, housed at Oxford's Bodleian Library, was virtually unrolled. Among the first Greek words deciphered from within were terms translating to disgust, fear, foolish, and life. Not exactly a grocery list. Not exactly a love poem. This was a text wrestling with dark human truths, preserved by the very catastrophe it may have been warning about. Here's the part that unsettles historians. Philodemus lived generations before Vesuvius erupted. He wasn't recording a disaster. He was writing about cycles of moral and societal collapse, about how silence is used as a weapon, about how knowledge is suppressed to maintain control. And then a volcano buried his words in fire. Exactly the kind of catastrophe his philosophy cautioned about. Coincidence? Maybe. But the AI doesn't care about coincidences. It just keeps reading. So, how exactly does artificial intelligence read a scroll that looks like a burned stick? Or make sense of symbols carved into stone 5,000 years ago? The short answer is pattern recognition. But the real answer is far stranger and more powerful than that suggests. AI systems don't read the way we do. They don't need to understand meaning. Instead, they analyze relationships. Which symbols appear together? How frequently they repeat? Where they sit within a structure? It's like a giant autocomplete system trained not on modern text messages, but on the fragmented whispers of dead civilizations. 3 core techniques drive this revolution. Language modeling trains AI on vast datasets of known texts until it learns not what each word means, but what tends to come next. When ancient text is damaged, the AI predicts what belonged there based on statistical patterns. Character segmentation teaches machines to isolate individual letters from noise, bled ink, cracked surfaces, partial erasure, like picking a single voice out of a stadium of screaming fans. And symbol clustering groups similar characters by shape, position, and context, letting the AI suggest what recurring clusters might represent: names, verbs, numbers, or ritual terms. One tool called Deep Scribe was trained on 6,000 annotated images from the ancient Persepolis archives. These cuneiform texts, pressed into clay 2,500 years ago, vary wildly by scribe, region, and century. Deep Scribe hit 80% accuracy, accelerating translation that would have taken human experts decades. Meanwhile, Ithaca, built by DeepMind and trained on 60,000 ancient Greek inscriptions, can predict missing characters, date texts to within decades, and suggest where an inscription originated. It helped reveal that the Dead Sea Scrolls were written by multiple scribes, not one. Perhaps eeriest is the work on palimpsests, manuscripts where original writing was scraped off and overwritten. Using generative adversarial networks, AI can reconstruct ghostly traces of erased ink. 2 neural networks play a game. One recreates vanished text, the other spots flaws, repeating until the recreation is nearly indistinguishable from the original. This technique uncovered lost mathematical work by Archimedes hidden beneath a 13th century prayer book. But here's the uncomfortable truth. AI doesn't know the difference between a harmless poem and a forbidden prophecy. It doesn't understand cultural taboos. It doesn't pause at warnings. It just reads whatever it finds. And some of what it's finding was clearly hidden on purpose. The Herculaneum scrolls are just the beginning. Around the world, AI is pulling voices from the ground that haven't spoken in thousands of years. And the messages are disturbingly consistent. In ancient China, the oracle bones of the Shang dynasty, dating back over 3,000 years, represent some of the earliest known Chinese writing. These weren't letters or stories. They were questions carved into turtle shells and ox bones, heated until they cracked, with the cracks read as divine answers. In 2024, Chinese researchers introduced AI capable of matching oracle bone characters to modern equivalents using hundreds of thousands of digitized glyphs. What they uncovered were patterns in the questions asked. Many feel eerily modern. Warnings of plague, records of famine and fire, requests for guidance in times of instability. These bones weren't just about seeing the future. They were about controlling it. When to make sacrifices, when to wage war, when to stay silent. Move to Central America, and the Mayan world reveals similar themes. Their writing system, made up of intricate glyphs where each symbol can represent a syllable, a word, or an entire concept, was once considered completely indecipherable. Machine learning projects have now trained algorithms to segment and classify these glyphs with pixel-level precision, even from weathered and damaged monuments. What the glyphs reveal isn't just religion or kingship. They document sacrifice, drought, betrayal, and collapse. Entire dynasties are recorded rising and falling. References to prolonged drought appear across multiple city-states, tied to what scholars believe was one of history's most dramatic civilizational collapses. The texts describe blood rituals meant to balance the sky and calm the earth. Were the Maya trying to stop something they didn't fully understand? And then there's Nushu, the secret script created exclusively by women in southern China's Hunan province. Denied education, these women invented their own writing, passed from mother to daughter, hidden from men. In 2025, Dartmouth researchers used deep learning to decode Nushu, training a model on just 35 sample pairs and reaching nearly 50% accuracy on a script no AI had ever seen. What emerged from those texts was not light poetry. The themes were grief, isolation, resilience, and warnings. Writings spoke of silent suffering, unseen daughters, and bitter truths concealed from those in power. This was a voice of pain, preserved in secret, hidden from authority for centuries. And now a machine is reading it aloud. Some languages evolved, some endured, but many vanished almost overnight. And when you look closely, the disappearances don't always look natural. They look deliberate. Take Rongorongo from Easter Island. Strange glyphs carved into wooden tablets using a mirrored writing direction that flips every line. By the time Europeans arrived, disease, enslavement, and forced conversion had erased the culture entirely. Not a single living person can read it. Some researchers suspect it encoded genealogies, oral history, even warnings, possibly a form of encoded prophecy created as the islanders watched their society collapse. If they saw the end coming, did they try to preserve their knowledge in a code no outsider could crack? Then there's the Etruscan language, once spoken across central Italy before Rome's rise. The Etruscans were advanced, building cities, creating art, and practicing a spiritual religion centered on divination and the afterlife. Thousands of inscriptions survive, but most remain untranslated. We can pronounce their words and know their alphabet, but their meaning remains a mystery. The usual explanation is that Latin replaced Etruscan, but some scholars point to religious texts and rituals banned by Roman authorities. Certain Etruscan rites linked to prophecy and necromancy were declared dangerous. Some fragments reference omens, sky charts, and doctrines of cyclical catastrophe. Was this cultural assimilation, or a targeted purge of ideas too threatening to survive? And then there's the Voynich manuscript, a book found in an Italian monastery, filled with script matching no known language, and bizarre illustrations of unrecognizable plants. In 2018, AI suggested it might be encoded Hebrew with vowels removed. Another theory proposes it was a midwife's guide containing medical knowledge male authorities weren't meant to access. If true, it's one of the clearest examples of forbidden knowledge hidden in plain sight, concealed because its creators knew it would be taken from them. Throughout history, the pattern repeats. When a regime takes power, it rewrites the language. When a religion spreads, it buries older symbols. When a culture wants control, it controls who gets to speak and who gets to remember. Here's what keeps researchers awake at night. When AI processes texts from civilizations that never met, never traded, never shared a single word, and finds the same themes echoing across all of them, that's not coincidence. That's a pattern. Plague, fire, drought, silence before collapse. Knowledge buried by the powerful. Voices erased by conquest. Warnings encoded in secret scripts that only the initiated could read. These motifs appear in Chinese oracle bones, Mayan glyphs, Epicurean philosophy, women's hidden writing, and Polynesian carvings. They span 5 continents and 5,000 years. The Vesuvius challenge is now entering its next phase, aiming to read entire scrolls. Researchers believe dozens of new Greek and Latin texts could emerge in coming years, and many believe a second, unexcavated library still lies beneath the villa of the papyri. Meanwhile, the Meroitic script from the ancient kingdom of Kush is being analyzed by deep neural networks. Proto-Elamite, one of the oldest undeciphered scripts in existence, is yielding its first structural clues. Across the globe, algorithms are being trained on languages that have resisted every human attempt at translation for centuries. The machines don't fear what they find. They don't draw moral lines. They don't pause at ancient warnings or respect the seals placed on forbidden knowledge. They simply keep reading, letter by letter, pattern by pattern, pulling voices out of the earth that were silenced millennia ago. And that raises the final, most unsettling question. What happens when one of those voices says something we're not prepared to hear? What if the fire they warned about isn't spiritual? What if the silence they described isn't philosophical? What if they were trying to tell us something real, something urgent, and we buried them for it? The scrolls are open now. The algorithms are running. And the dead are finally speaking. The only question left is whether we're ready to listen. Thanks for watching. If this video gave you chills, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Drop a comment below. Do you think these ancient warnings are just metaphors or something more? Click the next video to keep exploring. See you there.